I have another poem for you today. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I don't remember the last one that we did.
I did that slam poetry about trans people being vampires.
God, that was such a good one.
It was very good. This is also a very good one. Today's is by Joshua Jennifer Espinoza, who is a trans woman poet. She has 2 books published right now. There Should Be Flowers and I'm Alive, It Hurts, I Love It. And she actually has a 3rd coming out soon, I Don't Want to Be Understood. And the name of this poem is called The Moon is Trans.
Hell yeah, this one speaks to me on, like, a spiritual level.
I thought you'd like it. The moon is trans. From this moment forward, the moon is trans. You don't get to write about the moon anymore unless you respect that. You don't get to talk to the moon anymore unless you use her correct pronouns. You don't get to send men to the moon anymore unless their job is to bow down before her and apologize for the sins of the earth. She is waiting for you, pulling at you softly, telling you to shut the fuck up already, please. Scientists theorize the moon was once a part of the Earth that broke off when another planet struck it. Eve came from Adam's rib, etc. Do you believe in the power of not listening to the inside of your own head? I believe in the power of you not listening to the inside of your own head. This is all upside down. We should be talking about the ways that blood is similar to the part of outer space between the Earth and the moon, but we're busy drawing it instead. The moon is often described as dead, though she is very much alive. The moon has not known the feeling of not wanting to be dead for any extended period of time in all of her existence, but she is not delicate and she is not weak. She is constantly moving away from you the only way she can. She never turns her face from you because of what you might do. She will outlive everything you know.
Damn. I have to say, I hate poetry. It is one of my least favorite forms of art. But that was a good fucking poem.
Yeah, I also struggle with poetry. I like a lot of poetry, but I find spoken poetry speaks to me more than reading poetry does.
That's fair.
And I've been selective about finding ones that I think you'll find resonate with you, so...
I mean, do I think that we need to send more men to the moon just to have them bow down in her amazing presence? Yes, but...
100%. And apologize for the sins of the earth.
Oh, God.
Well, thank you, Joshua Jennifer Espinoza, for that beautiful poem.
It was beautiful. I really appreciated it. Thank you. And keep up your fucking amazing work. I am so excited to see what this new book brings. Hi, I'm Anna, a transgender person.
And I'm Cam, your dad.
And this is The Transgenda, a podcast chronicling my transition.
And a cisgender man learning how to support it.
So, Cam, I was gonna say you go to see the doctor, but that is only fairly recently true.
Well, yeah, I mean... When you grow up in poverty, going to see the doctor is not a common thing.
Yeah, that is fair. That is very, very fair. So, I think that this topic might resonate more to the audience who has asked this question, specifically Danny. Danny uses she, her pronouns, and says, I recently decided to tell my doctor that I wanted to transition to female, but when I went in, I chickened out, and I didn't end up telling him. How do you bring it up to your physician?
Oh, that's a great question, Danny.
Right? It was like a good question that really resonated with me.
Well, this is pretty in the weeds on a topic I don't even think I've heard you talk about. Like, how did you first tell a physician that you wanted to transition, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I had a very similar experience to Danny. Danny, I don't know how old you are, but when I was about 14, I think, I was like, okay, I'm going to tell my doctor, I want to transition. And I chickened out. I couldn't do it. And I think it ended up being that I had started my social transition before I was really able to be like, hey, I'm trans, help me get care. And this was after I hadn't been to the doctor for about a year and needed a, physical just to make sure that I was doing okay. And that is actually the doctor that I went to go see on your recommendation. The one who I didn't really resonate with. But he got me in touch with St. Luke's, is the hospital system that I use. And he got me in touch to St. Luke's Mental Health to try and start that process. And it kind of started from there. But really what it took was coming out socially to people who I trusted and knowing that, if I did start my transition, I wouldn't be completely alone anymore, which I know is not super helpful an answer. But
now, what would you say to, living in a community, I guess our size or larger is probably kind of where you're at, that actually has trans healthcare, a department specifically? I mean, would it make sense to encourage someone like Danny to try to find a way to go to that sort of a resource first? Or do you need a referral from a physician? I mean, I guess I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I would say from almost all of the things that I have worked on and worked through, you typically have to have a referral to go to a specialty clinic, like a gender clinic or something like that. What I will say, though, is you can talk to a primary and they will be able to help guide you. And, I'm not saying that every primary is a good doctor. I'm not even saying that every good gender clinic is a good clinic to go to. But if you feel comfortable talking to your doctor about being trans, they can help guide you to some of those resources. What I would say is probably a good way to get started, too, is finding a healthcare worker who might not be a doctor, who might not be something like that, and kind of starting to talk to them about it. I know that the people at our local Planned Parenthood are fantastic for that. They have special training in gender-affirming care. They're who I go through to do my hormone management. They're fantastic. So if you're in the Duluth area, Planned Parenthood is amazing. If you're somewhere else that maybe doesn't have a Planned Parenthood or where gender-affirming care might not be super acceptable, but you are starting to talk to people about it, try and find somebody who you trust who might be working in the healthcare industry and kind of talk to them about it. Ask what they might have around. Unfortunately, I can't give detailed advice for every single area
Right.
about where you should go and talk to people, but that's probably a good place to start too.
Well, and this is where we do a disservice to our international listeners too. So
Yes.
Sorry, we really only know the U.S. healthcare system, and particularly our sort of mid-sized city healthcare system. We're lucky to live in a place with two large hospital systems, so there's a little bit of extra resource here, and then we have the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota
and the U of M. The U of M system through Minneapolis is fantastic. Like, they have one of the best gender clinics in the world as well. So if you're in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, please, they are also very good.
Now, the next thing I'm going to say might actually be a good transition to the next listener question that you had selected. But I have a feeling that somebody, not necessarily Danny, because we don't know how old this person is, but, we have a lot of listeners that are minors.
Yes.
And so their healthcare is being dictated by their parents. So step one in this process might have to be having a candid conversation with your parents about your potential transition.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of briefly talk on the doctor side of this before I move on to talking with your parents about it. So if you are under the age of 18 and you're going to the doctor for physicals or something like that, typically they will have a period where they ask the parent or guardian to step out of the room. So you have a chance to talk to the doctor one-on-one without any parental presence. And a lot of doctors do this as a way to try and get kids who might be in an abusive situation or something like that to open up and tell them about that so that they can get the help they need. But this is also a really good way to talk to a doctor without needing to tell your parents. And of course, the doctor is going to do what the doctor might, and that's terrifying. But if you ask, hey, I've not told my parents yet, I really want to kind of explore these options first, hopefully the doctor will respect that. Eventually, you will need to tell your parents, though, or I guess most of the time, you will need to tell your parents. And that is a hard conversation. I think we've briefly touched on it before. Milo says that...
Milo is one of our listeners. Sent in a question here.
Sent in a question that says, my family doesn't know that I'm trans, and I would like to tell them. I feel like I need hormones, and I'm having a lot of trouble telling my best friend. And really, I'm worried about getting proper care and losing people. And these are fears that I think all of us who are trans can really resonate with. So I guess starting with telling your parents. Cam, my father, do you mind enlightening our audience on how I told you?
Yeah, well, it started with a text message, for sure. Certainly, go back some episodes and you can hear the more detail in the story of Anna and I, sort of figuring out that communication process. But, I think there are lots of different ways that we've heard that people talk to their parents. Anna chose to send a text message kind of briefing me and setting me up on that. And then the next day I took her out to breakfast and we had a little more candid of a conversation. And then that was by far just the starting place for all of that. Yeah. Because I knew nothing at that point. I knew absolutely, I was hope supportive, but dumbfounded simultaneously.
Yeah. I think we've made the comment, or I think I made the comment before of you were supportive, but also said some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
Just, because the natural reaction, and you're going to find this with parents and friends and whoever you're telling that care about you, is to try to rationalize often, try to talk it through. And if you don't have the language for it or any understanding about what that really is, which always leads me to, our best advice is to listen and ask questions and not, start framing things with your own worldview, because inevitably, my fellow cis people, you're going to be wrong. A lot of things, exactly. Unless you are well versed in this world. And every trans person's experience is their experience. So there's nothing universal about this.
Yeah, and thinking back, I think we have done an episode, at least briefly talking about how to talk to your parents about coming out and everything like that. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that in particular, but really what I would say is do it however you feel most safe and comfortable doing it. Whether that means getting a bunch of friends and having that safety net, texting like I did, or sitting your parents down and being like, hey, I have something really big I need to tell you, and I need you to just listen to me. Whatever works best for you. And also be informed. It will go so much better for you if you know the research and the science and whatever else your parents might ask you. Because I know that you had a lot of questions and I had some answers, but not that many.
Well, and then, again, talking to cis people in this moment, that's where doing your own research. Nope, I don't want to say it like that because that has bad connotations in our society right now. That's where listening to trusted sources and finding content that is going to be useful to you. Our specific episode on sex, gender, and sexuality is sort of our starting point that we point people to of if you want just a clinical diagnosis of what gender and sexuality and sex are, that's the episode to listen to, because Anna does a really great job laying that out in scientific terms over what those things mean. That's a really good place to start.
Yeah, and outside of our podcast, which I hope you guys aren't just using my podcast. I hope you're learning that you have to use a bunch of other resources too. But outside of our podcast, I was able to do this research at the age of 12. And so really, a lot of people should be able to do this research and find credible sources. The Transgender Law Center have a couple of really good resources. If you just search things like trans topics, you will find plenty of really good sources that have credible and good information. And also, whatever information you are finding, fact check and make sure that it is correct. Because unfortunately in our society, especially here in the US, you can find a lot of hate and misinformation. So please make sure that if you're a cis person learning about your trans people, or if you're a trans person trying to help educate your cis people, make sure that the information you're spreading is correct.
Looking for positivity within our community? Then listen to Queer We Are, the podcast where you hear some of the most interesting and successful LGBTQ plus people share uplifting stories, including their definition of success, how they achieved it, and what they learned along the way. Guests include celebrities, activists, politicians, athletes, and many more. Click the link in the show notes and check us out, or go to queerweare.com. If you've been looking for both fun and inspiration, now you know where to find us. Queer We Are.
And as always, we'll put some links in the episode description that are a good starting place. Now, thinking about Milo, one of Milo's fears is losing people around them. And, one thing I think we've learned in this is that families and friend groups are not a monolith.
No.
We've been surprised on both sides. People will tell their parents thinking that they're going to be super, transphobic and hateful, and they've embraced them with loving arms. And on the flip side, we've heard stories of people telling their friend groups and having to find new friend groups because, the people that they had surrounded themselves just were not supportive.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I will tell all of you listening, cis, trans, questioning, whatever, it's hard. Coming out and telling people that you're trans is really hard. And I get so many people telling me, oh my gosh, you're so brave, you're so courageous, whatever, for doing your podcast and being so open. And what I always tell those people and what I'll keep telling people is, I'm doing it because I never had anybody to do that for me. I never had anybody telling me, honestly, that it's going to be fucking hard.
It's going to be hard, but it's also going to be okay.
It's going to be okay,
that's,
yes.
Among our messages, it's those things are both true.
And I also never had anybody in my corner saying, I will fight for you, I will love you, no matter what. When I came out to Cam, he definitely took on some of that role, but he's still my dad, and we had that relationship. So I, as an outside observer, if you're trans, if you're questioning and you want to come out, know that, I love you, and I'm going to be here fighting for you, and you're not alone. And so keep fighting. And people will leave, and you will lose people. And it's unfortunate, but it's something that happens to everybody for any sort of reason. And it sucks really bad when it's about something you can't control, like being trans. But if they are leaving you because you're trans, they didn't deserve your amazing company anyway, is kind of the way that I will look at it. And it's hard. And it's hard to hear that. And it's hard to know that you might lose some people, especially people who you care about and who should care about you, like parents, like teachers, like friends, but you're never alone. And you will find more people who are going to love you for you and who are going to support you. Something that we really talk about here on this podcast is found family. And it is critical that you find that family and that they support you for who you really are.
Anna and I are really lucky to have each other, but we also have really strong found family that are our co-support groups in
Yes.
many ways. And so, we just couldn't encourage you more. And we know everybody's circumstances are very different, and it can be sometimes hard to meet new people and to find those communities. But keep it up, and
We
listen
believe
to our
in you.
podcast for other for other suggestions. We'll keep providing that so that you can find the folks that are going to support you the best.
So, Milo, I'm not quite sure how old you are, and I don't want to assume anything, but, telling your best friend, no matter how old you are, can be really hard, especially when you're younger and your best friend is like everything to you. And telling any friends is honestly really hard. I know that when I first started coming out to people, the first people I told were my friends, but they were friends who I really had to gauge, I had to be like, hey, what are your thoughts on the political climate in America?
Please take this short personality profile so that we can vet you for friendship.
And I'll be honest, some of those people who are still, I would consider at least acquaintances, were not the most supportive, ended up not being my best friends anymore, but are, were not horrible to me. But so how would you tell your best friend? I would say do it in a way that makes you feel safe. If you're afraid that you're going to have physical violence, don't. Leave that friend. That friend no longer should be anywhere near you. But if you feel like, well, I'm scared that they might leave me, but they also mean a lot to me and I want to tell them, then you should mean a lot to them too. And they should be accepting of you. And I'm not going to say that every time it's going to go well. And I'm not going to say that every time you're going to judge correctly and be like, well, you mean a lot to me. Why don't I mean a lot to you? People have different feelings about each other and are not always consistent about that. But make sure that it's somebody who you trust, who you love, and who you know loves you. And if they meet that criteria, I would say do it in a way that makes you feel comfortable. Ultimately, it's your coming out. You don't owe them anything. In fact, they owe you a good job on coming out to me. I'm so thankful. I'm so proud. I'm so happy. That kind of emotion. So there are two other questions here that I think we briefly touched on, but I kind of wanted to go back to. So for feeling like you need hormones or worried about proper care, both of those things are things that we've touched on before on our podcast, and I hope that you are finding that information. Really, it depends on your age and where you're located. If you're in the US, typically you need to be at least 18 to start hormones, and to get proper gender care, I put that in air quotes, you really need to be 18 or 21 to start that. If you're outside of the US, I know the UK, I think, has hormones available to some individuals as young as 16, but proper care and hormones typically start at 18. So those are the two that I know. Anywhere else in the world, I'm sorry, New Zealanders, I don't know what's going on in New Zealand for you guys. But do some research on your local area, make sure that the laws are okay, and see what is available to you, because you never really know. We have another question that I wanted to touch on in sort of this how to talk to what I've labeled how to talk to your friends, your kids, and your friends' kids. This one was sent in by Anonymous. Thank you. And they ask, how do I deal with kids at my school asking me when I'm getting reassignment surgery? And they put in parentheses that I'm 12. First of all, how are you listening to our podcast?
I mean, you're welcome here.
You're welcome here, and you're loved here.
You're not our target audience for sure, but we're glad you're here.
Yes, I don't want to push you out. You're welcome here. We love you. I hope that the swears don't bother you. So, how do I deal with kids at my school asking me about gender or about reassignment surgery? I wish I had a good answer for this. I really do. And it's a really good question, and one that I think deserves a really detailed and in-depth response, and something that I really can't give that response to. So, what I'm going to say is you shouldn't have to deal with that, because kids should be getting educated by teachers, by adults, by people who are not children about what gender is and what reassignment surgery means and all these things, because kids shouldn't be bullied. I mean, kids bully each other for all sorts of reasons, but you shouldn't be the one to deal with that.
And that's my greatest concern here. I mean, just thinking about my own bullying experiences as a 12-year-old, it's just like, I do not think you would have presented this to us if it was being presented to you in a thoughtful way or in a kidding way.
Yeah.
This is kids who are definitely, trying to rile you up. I would be my guess.
And that's my guess as well.
And even if it's your best friend and they're, like, well, when are you getting the surgery? It's like, come on, buddy.
It's none of their fucking business.
It is none of your business. I mean, the easy answer is in 6 years or more, because currently that's where our health systems are at, is as far as, your age goes. And then add another 2 years from there for vetting and therapy and everything else. So, if you want to get technical, hey, you can be snide right back to them and like, it'll be at least 8 years if all goes well.
Listen, I started this process when I was 18, and it's taken me 3 years, and that's lucky. So I just want you all to know that, like, you can use that too, of like, well, this trans person I know took 9 years past our age to get this surgery, so fuck off, maybe.
Don't let any teachers hear you telling your friends to fuck off.
Yeah, don't tell any. Teachers can be real narcs sometimes.
Oh, we've got some wonderful teachers that listen to our podcast.
We do.
And I think they would also be
all.
nodding, going, yes, we are narcs.
We love teachers. We love you. You are sometimes narcs, and you know it.
Man, this is the episode where we're just making enemies of all our friends. All right, teachers, doctors, we're nobody's safe from us here.
I'm putting everybody on blast.
12-year-olds.
So really, what I wanted to talk about in this episode is, how do you talk to people about gender?
Yeah.
And if you're a kid, tell them what you're feeling. I mean, if an adult comes up to you, a trusted adult, don't talk to strangers, kids. Don't talk to strangers. But if a trusted adult comes up to you, like a parent or a guardian, or teachers feels weird to me. I don't think you should really be talking to a teacher about gender or how you're feeling unless you're really comfortable with that situation, and if that teacher is meaning well. But really what I would say is, tell them what you're feeling. Tell them, I am feeling like the world is falling down around me. Like, I don't fit in this body. Like, whatever terms and descriptions you want to use, that's okay. Because as adults, it's our job to make sure that our kids are being protected and safe, and it's our job to interpret what kids mean. I mean, honestly, kids say the weirdest shit. I think that any teacher, adult with a child, anybody who's ever interacted with children would say the same thing. Kids say the weirdest shit sometimes, and we have to interpret what that means. And so if you're a kid and you're listening to this, I'm not putting you on blast. I love you all. But I would say if an adult, like a guardian or something, comes up to you and asks, why do you say you're trans? Describe to them how it feels. Tell them, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm saying this. If you're an adult and you're going to a kid to ask them why they're saying that, first of all, fuck all the way off. But two, kids want to describe how they're feeling, and they don't have the same vocabulary we do. So if a kid comes up to you, and it's your kid, ideally, or a kid who you know and trust, and they say, hey, I feel like I might be trans, take them seriously, and take them to professionals, people whose job it is to make those determinations and to help these kids get resources, and be supportive of them. If they want to change their name, if they want to wear different clothing, whatever you have the resources and means for, let them, I'm not saying go out and change their birth certificate right away, but I'm saying, call them by their new name, use their proper pronouns. If you have the means, go and buy them clothes.
And I liked what you said, too. I just want to put a point in this because I think I don't want to buzz past it. The idea of having an adult not coming in with the aggressive tactic of, well, why do you think you're trans? Well, are you sure about that? That's the part that we were talking about earlier that may feel like the natural response sometimes for certain people. What you should be doing is saying, tell me more about that and tell me how you're feeling and what do you need in order to feel supported right now? And, and then lead that to, all right, let's start looking at some resources. I don't think we've ever suggested this before, but looking at resources together as a, caregiver child is a great idea. And
that is an excellent idea and something I have actually never thought of.
Right. I mean, that just seems logical. Watch a video together, and then talk about it. I cannot believe you and I, of all people, mostly because you and I do that sort of thing naturally, We're like, here's a cool resource, and let's check this out together and talk about it, but not everybody has that distilled into their relationships. And so...
that's a very good point. Is maybe your kid is questioning, maybe something like that, and you're starting to notice that. Maybe sit down and be like, hey, do you want to come watch this video about this kid who was born a male, but, is a girl? And, try and get them to engage in that. And honestly, even if your kid isn't questioning or saying that they're trans, we should be teaching kids about trans people anyway.
Right. I mean, if you're not the kid at school that's trans, there will be someone at school who's trans.
Yes.
We certainly know the statistics on that. It also makes me think about, our friend Sean telling us that, he had never heard the word transgender until he was in his mid-20s because of the sort of place that he was in. And so it's wouldn't it be great if caregivers were taking the opportunity to provide those kinds of resources? And I think a lot of kids these days, because gender identity has become so much more normalized as something that is talked about by younger and younger kids, they might just say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I've got two friends that are non-binary and one that's a trans man, and they might school you.
Yeah, exactly.
in that scenario, which is also fantastic. That's great.
Honestly, I hope we're getting to a point where the kids these days, and putting in quotes, know more about gender and are so much more flexible and fluid in it than even we are, my generation. Because my generation had to really fight and start that process, just like all of the generations before us has made small increments. And if we get to the point where the generation that my little brother Oliver is in is coming home to me or is coming home to Cam and is like, hey, I have this new non-binary friend, and it's just natural to him, that is the fucking goal right now. That would be amazing. So please, if your kids do have more experience with gender than you do, let them teach you.
Do you have a gender euphoria for us today?
I do. This one was also sent in by Danny. Danny, thank you so much for all the content today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Danny.
I recently came out to a few friends. Topical. One of them asked me to join his D&D campaign. When I joined the voice chat, he introduced me as she, her, and it instantly made me feel less anxious and generally accepted in the group. I introduced him to this podcast, and if he's listening, I want to thank him. And hey, friend, I think you might know who you are. If you're listening, thank you.
Thank you.
D&D is an amazing tool, as we've talked about before, and letting Danny be herself and introducing her with the correct pronouns and name is incredible. So thank you.
D&D is such a good tool for learning to create welcoming spaces too, so that's just good dungeon mastering as well.
And good friending.
If you have questions about transitioning or supporting someone who is transitioning and you'd like us to talk about it on the show, please shoot an email to questions@transgendapod.com, click the chat with us button on our website, or DM us on all the social medias. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron on our Patreon.
Shout out this week to M, our new Backstage Pass and Sticker Club tier patron. Also, if you are in the US and you or any trans person you know has not filled out the US Trans Survey, please do so. We will have a link to it in our episode description, and it is critical for research and advancement of trans people. It is offered both in English and Spanish, takes about 30 to 90 minutes, and is live through November 21st, so please go and fill it out.
Consider it like taking the census. Like, this is really a huge deal for getting the right resources to the right places in our country and having a better understanding of the trans population.
The last US Trans Survey was in 2015, and we are still using that for research to this day. It is critical. As many trans people as possible fills it out. Additionally, please be sure to check out our episode description for links to resources on today's topics.
Thanks for listening. I've been Cam.
I've been Anna.
And this has been The Transgenda.
Love you all, except the bigots.
Would you like to support our podcast? Well, you're in luck. We have a Patreon now. Just visit patreon.com/transgendapod, and for as little as $3 a month, you can support the content that we're creating. And for $20 a month, you can join our Sticker Club, which provides you with a monthly live stream, a shout out on the podcast, and a sticker every month from ourselves and creators that we adore. Again, just visit patreon.com/transgendapod, and thank you for all your support.